let's come back. So I want to make this podcast or this videos a bit more relational, because especially now with a number of things that's going on, it's important that your videos are not just you talking to the camera, but really having a bit of a moment with your audience. And so what I'll be doing is I'll be reflecting on some of the questions coming out from my class and from the discussions that my students are having on Bonding with God. And every week on Thursdays, they find a time to sit and discuss a chapter in the book. It's about 8 chapters and it's an 8-week class. So, and if you're doing that, I think also if you're reading the book and want to kind of reflect and some questions that comes to mind, feel free to send me those questions and I'll be so happy to respond. And hopefully maybe time will come when we do some live sessions where people could call in and we could talk about what they're thinking, their understanding, and some of the questions that they might have reading the book. So the first question, it's how does your relationship with God mirror the attachment bonds you formed or didn't form with the people who raised you? And this particular question is related to, I think, chapter 2 of my book, Bonding with God. And in chapter 2, essentially, we see that the internal working models that we develop in our early childhood experiences, those internal working models, they don't just stay in our childhood. They actually are transformed over time. They travel with us into our relationship with God, even our relationship with our romantic partners, and the people that are playing role as relational partners in our lives. You know, one of the groups that was led by one of my students, I won't mention the name, they kind of noticed something important. And in one of the things that they had mentioned in their notes is that they mentioned the fact that the dynamics of secure, anxious, and avoidant attachment that shape how we bond with parents also shape how we approach or avoid God. And I think that's so important because our positive relational engagement would always foster that bonding experience, and sometimes even our environments of living in an environment of invalidation or harshness can also disrupt that bonding experience as well. And so I think this question is not necessarily an abstract question, because indeed, our relationship with God does mirror the attachment bond that we form or did not form, or formed in a way that it's dysfunctional. It does reflect ultimately in how we were raised. And of course, I know this is something that we don't talk a lot about within our faith communities, and we try to stay away from the psychology of faith because it becomes very personal. And so we kind of push it aside and talk about faith as some kind of belief system, as a cognitive framework, as a cognitive thing. But faith is more than just a cognitive process. It also involves our emotion. It involves our internal working models. It involves the early years of our life. It involves the way our social environment ultimately shape the person and who we are becoming. And that cognitive, if you will, a cognitive framework of how we see ourselves and others does mirror in how we walk with God, in how we relate to God. One good example from that could be, I think this was in one of my classes, a student had asked the question, so does that also mean that if someone grew in a household where the father or the parents were very authoritative in their approach to parenting, does that also reflect in the way they might be relating to God? In most cases, it's possible, because such a person might grow up also seeing God as being authoritative, and actually to the point where that becomes the default mode of seeing God, the way that they perceive God. He has to be someone that is authoritative, and they sometimes, the way they read scriptures that align with those authoritative, judgmental God images, becomes really something that's compatible with their internal working model. But it's important to also recognize that the fact that you grow up a certain way doesn't mean that's how your world should be. And which is why I think this book is important, because it can help you to really be aware. And that's why I wrote the book, just to create an awareness around how the early years of your life might be shaping the way that you see God and experience Him for yourself. And if this has been helpful, and you have questions yourself that you want to share so we can ponder and reflect on it, please feel free to drop a comment, drop the questions in the comment box, and I'll continue to answer those questions. We'll see you around soon. Bye for now.